Hey everybody, welcome back once again. I'm here with my friend Richard.
Hello.
We are here once again on site at his place of employment, and he's brought his artist editions. We just got done looking at the Todd McFarlane Spider-Man, and he brought Jim Lee Xmen. This is one that when they announced it, I'm like, I absolutely have to pick up this book. But then the price kind of made me kind of waffle on it a little bit. But now that I get to see it, yeah, I'm going to buy this thing.
This has not been good for my pocketbook. Learning about artists' editions.
It's kind of like a drug addiction. Like you get kind of addicted to it.
I've got a list of them now.
Yep.
I'm going to have to spread it out over months.
Yeah.
There's one that I want that I can't get, and if it pops up, I don't know what I'm going to be willing to pay for that one.
You have to go to the wife like, I spent some money. I'm sorry. I had to. But when you see things that are like this, the work that you've grown up with, I was a huge Jim Lee. I think I was more into Jim Lee and X-Men at the time than you were.
Oh, absolutely.
In terms of what originally came out?
I was only into the animated series on Fox. That's okay. My experience. I never read an X-Men comic ever.
So you got into the artwork portion of it.
I bought this just because it's Jim Lee and I wanted some artist edition Jim Lee.
Love this interior. Again, we talked about it on the other one where you got this big canvas to use on the inside front cover. Give us a great big shot of it. And one thing they were doing at the time, and I don't think it lasted very long, these little circle highlights. I think it's something that Barry Windsor Smith was doing on some of his other work, and so these other artists were like, I don't get what they're trying to communicate with these little spots. These aren't whiting out to cover mistakes. This is like we're putting in like a highlight, like a circular glow.
It's doing this,
but
it's in a shaded area, so they're.
I'm like, I don't. If they were to draw this and have none of that, it doesn't detract or add to it. It doesn't need to be there. But that aside, that mask the helmet he makes look good. What a great giant hand.
Well, in this like Kirby-esque. It's not Kirby Crackle, but
not quite, but
it's related.
It's similar to that.
It's related.
I would love to see how Scott Williams inks these, if that's by brush or his pen. I'm guessing brush with a really nice sharp point and just gets in there and it's probably just dashed out pretty quick. You got to have that kind of quick motion to keep the energy on it. Looks so nice. All this stuff is just burned into my brain. So Scott Williams talking here. That's interesting. I actually need to read this. Maybe I'll have it'll be high enough resolution I can go home and on the video just freeze frame it, screenshot and read it that way. So this is interesting because Jim Lee and then Dan Green doing the inks over him. Now Dan Green as an inker was he was, I think best, he was working with Mark Silvestri on the Wolverine comic, and those two together made some incredible artwork. And so it's definitely a different vibe. He doesn't have the hyper precise Scott Williams vibe. But it looks really good. This is Jim Lee. He's still not quite Jim Lee yet, if that makes sense. Like, it looks like him, but you didn't get those artistic things that kind of become who he is. Sorry, I was curious. 89. So this is the same time as some of that McFarlane Amazing Spider-Man, because I remember looking, it was 89, right before 1990, before a lot of things just took off. And see, to me, looking at this, I know Dan Green's ink so well. I remember looking at this going, is this a Mark Silvestri page? Because it's not quite Jim Lee. There's some things that don't look like the way he does things now. So, but it looks really cool. Anyway. Then this is getting into it much later.
I love
that screen tone
tone
kind of fades and kind of looks ugly. I mean, I wonder what it looked like originally, if it was more like a gray. You know,
I've never even seen that stuff.
Right.
I've seen it used.
I think the reproduction of it's like a gray, but maybe the adhesive that sticks it on.
That looks like the yellowing of the same stuff.
It's kind of scuzzy. I've mentioned this a lot. I guess I don't need to repeat myself too much, but Jim Lee at the time, especially when I started noticing his work here, he was the absolute best artist I'd ever seen on anything ever in the history of ever. I just couldn't believe that anybody could draw the way he did. This is
I love this panel.
a lot of weird atmospheric things going on, like this dry brush and then some whiteout over it. There was an issue, and it has to be this one, where it was super late, and I think they called upon Jim Lee and his buddies to do an issue in like 2 weeks. So it was Jim Lee doing layouts, Wills Protasio doing pencil rendering, and then Scott Williams doing ink. And if you know the artist, like these are very Wills Protasio faces. I can see it completely. He's got a very interesting way. It's not quite Jim Lee, but so it's a really interesting like Jim Lee's energy and vibe, Wills Protasio rendering it, and then Scott Williams doing some, again, great inking. Like this isn't like a rush job. I mean, it was a rush job. It was an entire issue in 2 weeks, but I don't feel like it suffered from like looking like we have to, rush it out. So there's like they weren't skimping on backgrounds.
I love how this is done too. How they've inked it and then.
A good point. I never thought of that. They probably did like a bunch of black up into a certain point and then did that. And then you're right. And then throw in that white. I never thought. I've always seen those textures. I wondered how they do it. But now that you can kind of see it. Yeah.
As soon as I saw that panel, I tried it on my iPad.
Oh, yeah?
That method.
That's interesting. It looks like to me, this, like the white on that is different than this. It looks like this whole panel maybe isn't pasted up.
Yeah, I thought
and then
that too.
the scuzzy lettering that yellows on top of that. So not quite exclusively Jim Lee. Same thing with these. This looks more Jim Lee, but I can see, again, if you follow the artist for a long time, and I have, like something about the hair and the faces is just very much a Wills Protasio.
These little tiny.
It's barely even an ink line. It's just like such a little blob of like a line, but it reads. Like you can tell what you're looking at. Great city shot. Like again, they're not skimping on it. Like
look at all those people.
Perspective and people, and I love this running shot of him. This is where Storm was reborn out of the Siege Perilous, and so she's like a kid. That's where she ran into Gambit. And so she was just a kid for a long time, and she was taught like how to survive on the streets by Gambit, which it was an interesting concept, and it didn't last very long. But this transition of her, this is showing how someone did a thing, like they took her and did some kind of process to her, change her from a grown woman down to a kid, and then look at the.
This is what I was staring at.
I remember seeing the looking up, because I've seen another artist group look at this book, and they were talking about this. The printed page loses so much. There's so much like these great line work going into it, and then that white on top of it.
Well, and that's got to be the era of reproduction, because now in reproduction,
yeah,
you wouldn't lose that.
But you get it on newsprint with those flat colors, and it's printed, and it just kind of mashes everything and flattens so much stuff out. And again, Jim Lee, Wills Protasio, Scott Williams, especially this panel layout with just a figure here and then this like shadow. This is very much a Wills Protasio kind of vibe. And again, I can see it in the figure work. That's him, this face. He has kind of a more rounded look. Jim Lee's faces are more angular, but it looks fantastic. Now we're into just Jim Lee. This is that, does it say the issue on here? It's this one, this book. This is the cover to...
and it's issue
268. There we go. This is where I believe from this issue on, he was the regular penciler on Uncanny X-Men from this issue out. And this just was like, everyone was just blown away by it. And I still am. I was aware of Captain America, but I didn't have any like particular love or dislike of him. But Jim Lee drawing Captain America, and I've said this with a lot of things on my videos, like sometimes the smaller panels are more interesting to me than the big ones. You see this ninja kicking him in the head, he's reared over, and you got the guy with the ninja Wolverine claws lined up to slash at him. This was when this one came out, we're like, oh, okay, I'm on board. And they always did Black Widow's costume for a long time, like with this tone. It was just done this way for a long time. I always liked how Wolverine was like twirling these pipes, sitting there spinning them. And this gets in there because this is before he had his metal bones and claws, so he's just going to show up on scene to help bust Captain America. Because this is set way back in time. This is like the 40s or something like that, I think.
Okay.
So that's why he shows up and he doesn't have his metal claws or anything like that. So this is showing them having met way back in time.
Gotcha.
Because there's two stories. There's an A plot and a B plot going along, like 49 years later. So past and then the present. And
I just love that.
That energy texture. It's kind of that Kirby Crackle, right? Where her thing
when
blasted.
I learned what Kirby Crackle was and I finally had a word for it.
Right. You're like, that thing. And I utilize it. I found a really great way to do it with a Q-tip. Dip a Q-tip in some ink, and then you can like get circles and build them up and just keep going. You're not wearing out a nice brush. And this is where I also started to notice Jim Lee could draw like the best female figures. Like it's not overly sexualized. I mean, it is her basically, if you want to think of it, basically kind of like a nude figure-ish, just skin tight. But the way he draws it, and then the lines and the curve, and even this up angle on that face, that's so hard. It's a hard angle to take a face and tilt it back like that.
It makes things ugly.
It does. You could really screw it up. You got to get that nose, because when you draw a face straight on, the nose is sitting down, but once you tilt it back, suddenly it's getting in line with the eyes, and then getting the chin at an up angle. I always dug the heck out of that Wolverine drawing. The way this muscular figure. Everything about all the artwork in this line work under the shadow of his eyes of that hat. Like I remember seeing this in this artist edition, again, seeing it online. I'm like, I gotta try that somewhere. I gotta find a place where I can attempt to do this shadow line work.
Every time I look through these, I want to ink something.
Like I want to try that. Yeah. This is always a great scene with the cars chasing out or like flying down the street and Wolverine's just standing in the road. And so he just jumps up on the hood and just kicks straight through it. Great movement.
Which reminds me of Terminator, when he had to punch through that
window, smash through the glass,
and they had to rig up a hydraulic arm because it was so hard that even when they prepared the glass ahead of time, he couldn't punch through it.
I didn't know that. That's interesting. If you see on these, you can tell he's signing them off to people like To Leo Best. I wonder how much he sold these for originally. I bet they're worth a lot. But these are kind of...
Back in this era, comic book pages sold like $25 to $75.
Very cheap stuff. And now, especially anything Jim Lee, thousands of dollars minimum. But these ones look very like not cared for, because look at that kind of yellowing all over it. This is what I've reviewed this issue. This is one of my highest viewed videos. Is this issue? It's X-Men, it's Jim Lee, it's Rogue in the Savage Land. Again, I didn't know anything about Rogue, the character, at the time, so I'm just kind of reading these fresh when I'm getting them. And this is one of the funnest issues because, again, I don't know what was going on, but I was interested. I'm on board. Here's that famous, I was talking about Savage Land Rogue has become like a cultural thing in comics. Everyone's always drawing her, showing that. And it was just a couple of pages in one issue.
It's not even that.
When she was actually just there. Now, there's a lot of really interesting, like she's just there, no power. So she's like running from dinosaurs, hunting for fish, surviving on her own, almost wearing nothing. Who's not interested in this? But it was not a lot of material. But man, culturally, everyone grabbed onto it. And I did. And I like it. I had no idea who Ms. Marvel was. I didn't know what their backstory was. I'm a little more familiar with it now. See, they're doing that little circular highlight thing.
Mm-hmm.
And and we were talking about the inside front page. That is this. Those little spots. I mean, I guess when it's kind of reduced down as to look like little highlights on his outfit, I guess it starts to make a little bit more sense.
I think it works.
Yeah, it's just maybe it's just weird to my eye looking at it super close up. But what a great shot! I mean, has Magneto ever looked cooler?
Yeah, there's that other one that's later in the book.
Yeah, from the later on, but starting here, like, what a regal, powerful like villain. And then this is getting into the Extinction agenda, where this is one of like the toughest battles the team ever went through. Like they got their butts handed to them for a long time, and there's a lot of characters I knew nothing about, but again, I didn't care because it was interesting. Let me make sure I'm not skipping a page. There's that more of that.
Zip-a-doo.
Yeah, great base. A lot of energy. Like the guys running, the debris blowing. I like how they put the credits on like blowing debris in the wind. Cool. There, that's really neat. And then again, we talked about this. Like somebody has preserved the heck out of this page. Like look at the original artwork is black and white, and then the lettering is so ugly. So somebody's taking care of that one. I mean, yeah, that. And I remember the page, like the colors to do like, you know, a tone for like the city-ish in the background, then another for the sky, and it works. If you were to hand this to somebody who's never seen...
Drop red lines.
Right. Somebody who's never seen this, or, you know, and like ask them to like, what do you see in the background? I bet they wouldn't know what they're looking at. They wouldn't understand it. Like, what is that? I don't know. That's great.
Well, it looks like... That looks like it's been copied, and so the yellowing looks photocopied, and then down here, they've pasted even more text on top of it.
Yeah, it's definitely different.
Like here too.
That's interesting. I wonder what actually went on there. It's always funny. I mean, I get this is where you have to give characters a moment to talk and give their perspective on things, but they're jumping down into battle. He's not going to be yapping all this text in an action movement scene, but they do it all the time. I always love this slashing movement, this big cut, like that great shot of Wolverine there. And there's another similar one where he's just chopping. Another one preserved really well, like crisp black and white. I always like this figure on, I almost called her Rogue for some reason, on Psylocke. Diving off to the side, like as he's like looking at us, she dives to the side. Looks like she's being shot at. Some bullet impacts behind her. This page is so great. I wish, you know, this stuff looks so good. I wish it was every page of every issue. But then this book would be $1,000 to buy. Another just, it might look simple. Like here, just draw a flat plank and draw these characters standing on here straight on. But you have to make sure you draw them in proportion so they're all standing on the same ground. And they're all, you know, bigger, smaller,
different heights,
different
builds.
Yeah, this would have taken some time, and then this crazy detailed ceiling background,
nuts.
And it's kind of like super unnecessary. It almost detracts. I don't know.
That's the kind of thing when you've got a lot of detail like that. Sometimes the color helps you read it better.
That's true. Yeah. Great shots.
So you have to think of that when you're drawing it too, because like, if it's just for black and white, you got to hold back on some of that detail.
Yeah. I remember reproducing these, drawing these things. There's a lot of whiteout on this, like gnarled, angry face of Wolverine here. I've talked about this because Liefeld does this a lot, but
that's really cool.
Oh yeah, that is that another tone? It has to be, right?
It has to be a tone.
Some kind of thing they lay down there and cut out. But look at these random lines in the background here.
It's just energy.
I guess. I get these lines here because his wings are spraying feathers, so it's showing like action lines, but these are just kind of like background textures that I don't think they need to be there. I don't know. Great shot of Wolverine, and then them just blasted into each other. I redrew these all the time. Even this scary little face. Make sure I have everything on camera here like we should. Even these silhouetted battle scenes are great. I try to imagine trying to conceive of this and then just drawing it, because now it's a down shot on all these giant figures.
Like, all this is just like,
he's got like these helicopters smashed into the ground, and so they're kind of faded out going into the distance, and they're overlooking it, trying to figure out what's going on. I like this Magneto in the background where like his figure kind of fades out into some cross-hatching lines, some smoke. It's just really
that's a fun technique.
Atmospheric and moody.
Yeah. It's fun to figure out how to sell that in black and white.
Yes.
And then with the intention, these obviously with the intention of putting color on it.
Yeah. This is something like you probably, if you've watched my video, I was talking about why everyone is always trying to make out with Rogue to have her powers. All she needs to do is touch skin to skin. She can touch him with her finger, but why does she have to go up and kiss him? Especially some disgusting monster that she hates. You don't have to kiss him. I don't know that
I think it's because she's hot.
I mean,
and because as a woman, she can distract a man and make him forget what's going on.
That is
kissing him.
Completely valid. Because I would stop in my tracks, but unfortunately, it does nothing to him except get him excited because her powers aren't working. Oh, I forget, they don't have the next page. But she doesn't realize, or she forgets that her powers don't work. So he just kind of grabs her. He's like, "Oh, that was cool. Let's do that again," and grabs her and kisses her again. It's like, it's a little weird. I'm like, guys, what are you doing? And then look at this yellowed, crappy, horrible. Like,
that's the tones.
Yeah. Great figure. I mean, again, this is another character. I had no idea who this was. But there she is, and then she got all this weird piping just flowing around her, but I don't know that he created that, so it's not his fault, but
this is cool. These spots and then this texture.
Yeah. Sorry, just the artist in me is just looking at.
I know. I'm staring at all this.
Yeah.
Here.
I'm like how you take and draw all these figures in here, and then this kind of like fades out the bottom. It was like some smoke and some debris, and it reads perfectly fine. You don't need to see all the perfect details of where does her leg go, where's hers at, because it reads. You see what's going on. Another wonderfully preserved page, very black and white. Again, in the books, no idea who any of these guys are. I didn't know of, I mean, maybe I did, actually. I'm sorry. I had read some of the classic X-Men and the Dark Phoenix saga, but I don't know that these guys were in it, though. It's hard to say. So much time has passed since my first exposure to all these things. I was like this side view of Wolverine's face, and he's just, because they're being held down by these like slimy plant tendril things, and he's like got him tensed out. She's even saying here, way Wolverine's straining, he's going to bust a gut. But he's stretching that tentacle awfully tight. Her fireworks, because each one of these tentacles were tailor-made to hold each one of them down. Like Wolverine was the ones he's being held down by. He cuts it, but they instantly heal. She uses her fireworks on hers, and it instantly heals. But she uses her fireworks on his, and that's what gets him free. So for some reason, it made it sound like they were kind of like specific to their each character's powers. Look at the textures of this jungle that he's flying over. Just a ratty old brush, probably just dabbing it on there. I do that all the time. And then once you get it on, you can come back with some white paint and
then going over with the lip just.
Again, some of these guys are preserving the heck out of these pages. Very nice black and white. Some paste up or something over that. Because you can see the zipatone going on there for the shadow, but something weird's going on there. No big deal. I remember even noticing sometimes the zipatone things I didn't notice right away in the original read of the book, but I remember noticing it somehow in this panel. And I wonder what makes them, like, did they just have a sheet of it and they're just like, let's just throw it in on this panel, just cause, on just one of them.
Yeah, because they come in a fade.
Right.
And so they're like, okay, let's lay it over that.
Maybe there's like some extra strip. Let's just, it'll fit on here. I always like this teleportation where they're together and they just kind of reproduce the same drawing, but it goes into like extreme, like black and white to show that they're beaming away in a burst of energy. I always liked how Gambit does this throw and like his hand doing that gesture, long, a little bit shorter to show that movement.
Mm-hmm.
Oh yeah, they're testing because they got to get away and they're up against people way more powerful. So she throws her little globule firework things and see how they interact when he throws his charged up cards at them. We'll see how they interact together.
Okay.
And it does a big old explosion. It's probably not going to have that page in here, but those things interacting. Oh yeah. So here comes her little blobby things with his things, and it just boom, does this massive explosion that blows out the side of a building, which gets the attention of Wolverine. And
that's really fun how that's just
mm-hmm.
those like really fine lines and then just these blocks.
Yeah,
I just love that.
Very energetic way to show an explosion. These long sweeping crosshatch lines. And this is a thing. She gets shot in the head by a laser gun. This happens a lot to these characters. They get hit by a thing and they're just kind of fine. They didn't kill her. They didn't blow her head off. What kind of gun do you got? It's like getting punched in the head. Another one of those like extreme heavy shadows. She beams out of there as Gladiator comes at her. He's basically Superman. He's got the power level of essentially Superman, as I understand it. And these are not the Xmen, but these alien creatures that have like imprinted their genetic code onto themselves, so they look like and have the powers of specific Xmen. So like he chops at her, and they don't have that next page in here, but they're not. That's not Wolverine. That's an alien under his, like adopting his genetic traits to look like them. This is why it stabs Wolverine straight in the back and has him down, and he starts turning into a creature. Maybe there are Skrulls, actually.
Oh,
that might be Skrulls. But yeah,
there's a lot of this in this book where you see the blue line on these big lettering things.
I haven't paid attention to that. I'll have to look for that.
I think that's the first one I've seen here, but from here on out, there's quite a bit of it.
I like this brushwork in his hair.
Yeah, that's beautiful.
Uh-oh. I was like, a page is ripped out here. No, we're getting into, well, first off, great page, Colossus, and then we're not going to get them all on one page here, and Jim Lee sold these original artwork for this in the last couple of years.
Oh yeah.
It was $1 million. Like, I'm not saying 1 million, but it was a dollar amount deal in the at minimum $1 million, maybe 2 or 3. I don't know. But he had held on to all of these. He even did a video online, like a live viewing, where he got out these original pages and showed them. I'm like, of course he would keep these. But he decided to sell them. And he must have split the profits between him and Scott Williams. So they must have both had a massive financial windfall, because some individual guy paid at least $1 million for this 4-page spread.
Jeez.
And I would love to know. It was a secret too. They didn't announce who it was. So that's just fascinating to me that somebody loves this stuff so much and has the money and is willing to pay that much for them. And that's what it took for Jim Lee to part with them.
Mm-hmm.
Like, hey, we'll pay. Like, I mean, let's just say it's at the bare minimum, $1 million. Hey, and Jim Lee's wealthy anyway.
Right. He's
not financially hurting for anything, but they're like, hey, I'll pay $1 million. Maybe it was 2. Who knows? Maybe it was $1 million. I don't know. Whatever it was. This is just so iconic. I'm trying to see what we got on the camera. Basically 3 pages across. And me and my brother, we talked about these when we did the Xmen #1 and how all the covers. And I thought they got, Magneto aside, they got, this is the most interesting, and then the second most interesting, and then the least interesting in a way. But there's something just great about them all. I've always loved that Jean Grey figure.
Yeah, that stuff, the Phoenix powers around her are just really cool.
That energy that's gooing around her. And my brother...
and then even this.
The ice bridge coming across, how he's all the way up. He almost kind of gets lost, Iceman, in a way. I like how Jim Lee drew in the big X-Men logo into the rock face behind him. That looks great. Psylocke was always like the hot girl, but I always thought the Rogue looked better. Colossus looks giant and imposing. Let's bring it back a little bit to get Magneto in. And this, Wolverine and Cyclops. I think I brought it up if you remember, but on the original like comic, there's a little box in the corner with Captain America's head.
Yeah.
Did you hear me? Did you hear us talk about that?
I don't remember what you said.
There was a box of Captain America's head on certain printed versions. Sometimes it was a barcode, but sometimes the pictures of Captain America's head. And on the one where it had Captain America's head, his claws are removed because it looked like his claws were stabbing into Captain America's head. And they didn't like that. I'm like, no one notices. No one would have cared. This is so stupid.
Editors worry about so much.
We can't stab Captain America in the head. Like, he's not. So just great, like, to see this stuff. But I'm guessing this is original artwork size. And another great Magneto shot. As much as I like that Magneto, I don't think it's better than the inside cover version, like that shot.
Yeah.
I actually think that shot of him is a little bit better than that, but still, at the time when we were picking all this stuff up, we were just like, this is so incredible. And then there's another, let's see, get all these in here. For the longest time, I'd only ever seen the center drawing. I had no idea there was flanking images, and I always thought that Havoc, that maybe been one of the first images I've ever seen of him, and that just looked so powerful, even in this ridiculous, like, weird little hat thing he's got going on.
Right.
I loved it. And then Wolverine looked great. Psylocke was super hot, and then it wasn't until years later I'm like, oh, there's a Storm, there's a Colossus, I had no idea this existed. What was this for? Was this a cover to a book? I don't know.
I don't know. Maybe
you could tell it's certainly a very specific era. It's kind of because the mansion was blown up and the X-Men had relocated to Australia, so they had
an Aboriginal guide.
I can't remember. Gateway. Because that's what he does. He uses his little bull roar to spin and created a teleportation thing. Okay. And that's how they get around. And Rogue was in this outfit for a long time, but she was out of that outfit by the time I started reading her. She had this very, like, specific hair. It was almost like Wolverine's hair was always, like, combed back in, like, this swooping motion. I think Jim Lee eliminated that. He's like, you know what? We're not doing that crap anymore. But it looks great. It's not that other cover, I don't think. You know, the stuff on the other side. It's not quite as awesome as that, but that's pretty dang good. I don't know what it was ever to.
It probably says in the index.
Oh, yeah, I'm sure. I think this is just Jim Lee.
That's a promo piece for X-Men 1.
Yeah, but him doing his own inking on it, which I think can look good, but I don't think it's the best version of Jim Lee. I think his work looks best when he's inked by Scott Williams, but it's still really good, right?
Yeah.
One of the more boring opening pages to an X-Men comic. I mean, it looks fine.
The spaceships are nice.
Yeah. I like the planet. I've tried to do this several times, and it's always hard to get, like, how do you draw, like, a planet? What textures do you use to describe a planet, and then leave a little bit of atmosphere, and then connect the space to it, maybe a highlight in the sun coming up? Or it's harder than I thought it would be.
It's hard to do in every medium.
Yeah, that would make sense.
Even in 3D rendering, it is hard.
That makes sense
to do.
Gosh, I want to just bring this physically up close to the camera a little bit. That face on Magneto is one of the coolest drawn. I just love everything about this. Me and my brother, when we went through X-Men #1, we gushed a lot over this, and I think the next one is just how awesome this looks. And even just forget the Magneto, the asteroid M in the background. And then again, the planet and space.
There's just a lot going on. That's so cool.
So great. And then this face here, I can't just tell you how much I think that looks so great. It's so good. It's funny. It took me a long time when I first was reading these. I'm like, what is this? What is this? Magneto for a while had a different costume. It had a giant M on it. It was it was like a purple color.
Okay.
I think. Really dumb. Not the classic one that works so well. There's more of those circular highlight things. You know? He didn't do this forever. He didn't do it for a long time, but he leaned into that for a long time. I don't know why. Because like I said, when I was younger, we were all really early teenagers when these came out. If I could have seen these artist edition books like this as a kid, I think I might have even just not. I just probably would have given up drawing because I don't understand. It's one thing to see it printed in a comic book, but to see it like this, I don't even know how do you even get these lines. I had like little gel roller pens as the nicest drawing tools I could find. I had no idea what art tools were and where do you find them in the small town I lived in. So no wonder it took me forever to learn how to do some of this stuff. And there was no internet
Right.
to tell us how to do it.
Right.
All
we had was Wizard.
We had Wizard. My brother and I were talking about this, like, look, all these extra ridiculous lines on his head, they are not needed. And I also never understood why they designed Professor X with these like Vulcan eyebrows. Like, is that necessary? I guess they thought it was.
It makes him look smart.
It makes him look like, it's like he's a little different. He looks very human, but he's got these weird little eyebrow things. I'm glad they did not do that on Patrick Stewart in the movies. That would have been so stupid. That would have been weird. I'm sure he would have looked at that and like, what the hell are you doing to me? We are not doing that. And then John and I, my brother, were talking about how all these pages, great big cool shot of all the characters. And just as a female figure shot, I thought that looked great. But you got Jean Grey, you got Rogue, you got Colossus, you got Wolverine. All of these were just, I think they turned a lot of these into like Valentine's Day cards.
I'm sure they did.
Like you get a Colossus one or Wolverine one. That stuff is really funny. There's your Psylocke. But this is what we were all here for. We were so enamored with Jim Lee's artwork. I guess you could argue that it takes away from the storytelling. The little cool little things you could do storytelling when you use up so much of the canvas to do a big, awesome shot of the character. I don't know. Man, I thought this stuff was just the greatest ever. Of course, him chopping up through the ground to actually get to the real Professor X and almost chop his head off.
Bang, Charlie.
Yeah. Bang, you did. This is interesting because there's a lot of blue line on here. So it makes me wonder if he like was struggling with this drawing and that's why there's so much blue line left over because there's not much elsewhere. I don't know. It make you wonder like what happened here. You wish he was sitting right here like tell me about that panel. My brother, he had a funny like fashion model Magneto, I think he referred to when we were going through the book. Because he's like got the Hugh Hefner kind of like robes and stuff. More big shots. You got your Beast in there. Introduce this big giant jet. There's this little bit of screen tone and this little bitty panel down here. Nothing else anywhere, but like here, throw it down there. Okay. Like
that is so cool.
This wrecked submarine from a previous issue way back in the time of the storyline and rising it out of the water. I like how he's got his little energy bubble around him to protect him. I guess he went down under the water, found it, and then just grabs onto it with his magnetic powers and brings it up. Like, and then this is another great shot of like this. The submarine's just smashed, like it's bent up, and he's taking out the nuclear weapons. I assume if you watch that video where me and my brother talked about this first issue, did you see the part where we discussed how he steals a nuclear bomb and he blows one up? He detonates a nuclear bomb, and it's never addressed again.
I do remember you saying that.
You'd think that would be a thing that would be called out somewhere, like detonating a nuclear bomb. If that would happen today, it would be the biggest news story for the next
anybody would talk about
5 decades because that's a big deal. I like how he did these cards. Just this white shape in like a little perspective as he tosses them. And John, he pointed this out. Magneto controls metal.
Yeah.
They're not metal cards. They're made of paper.
Yeah.
I'm like, oh, yeah.
Maybe there's metal in the inks.
Maybe, right? Who knows? Oh, there's more of that. You're talking about that color in the
I've
big
seen it
text
a few
letter.
times.
That's interesting. Classic shot of Psylocke kicking up there. Like, damn, girl. This is a children's book, sort of. As there's like skulls and dead bodies everywhere. This is a great page with the heavy lighting on this, and then Cyclops' little glowing visor in the distance. Cool. Oh yeah, here it is. Where she gets, Rogue. They're taken off. They get away. Rogue catches up with them. They're talking. The whoever these bad guys are. So they're Soviet planes. So they shoot missiles. They shoot her and hit her in the back, and so he detonates. An upper atmosphere nuclear detonation, at least a megaton in yield. Magneto's fired off one of the missiles. Never mentioned again. Because you see, like, maybe your brain's like, oh, they shoot missiles and she gets hit and maybe that's some of the explosion. But no, that would be a big deal. And it's like, and never, ever bring it up again.
And it only got that small panel on that page.
Yeah.
It's not like...
It's just like dying markers.
That's what it looks like.
You were talking about that, right? You can kind of get like a texture in this like shiny reflection on the floor. That's interesting.
Yeah, I hold on to markers until they were just
absolutely
gone.
Leaving no more lines.
Yeah.
There's more of that.
Mm-hmm.
What is that about? I don't know if I would have noticed that, but now you point it out.
And it's always just like on these big onomatopoeia words. And
yeah, that's weird. Now that I see it, it's like they intentionally are.
It's just a blue line.
But it's like they hand drew it on there in the shapes of those, like almost like they're coloring it in, sort of.
Yeah, I don't know.
Huh. That's a good point out there. Another one with a lot of sketchy blue line going on there that's not in the rest of it. And this is another one of those where there's like an action scene that probably takes 3 seconds, but she's having this massive amounts of thoughts. She's talking about here, I know without even reading it, that she's talking about, she's a telepath. She's like Professor X, she's Jean Grey. She could take him down with her telepathy, but she likes to fight physically.
Okay.
So she wants to get out there, the thrill of the action, like Wolverine. She likes the thrill of physical combat. So it seems kind of stupid. We're not screwing around here. These are very dangerous people. We need to take them down. If you could walk on scene and just like think and drop them, but that makes for a boring comic book.
Sure.
We don't get to see Psylocke's butt in the air.
I love all this texture.
Yeah.
All of it. All the way across. Like that. That's the stuff.
A lot of varying. So an energy explosion, a rocky guy. This guy's like a fire kind of energy as he flies. Explosions into bricks. You're right. A lot of really different, interesting stuff.
So fun to do.
Yeah. Great freaking spread again. It's basically a novel's worth of text on this page because Chris Claremont can't but help himself. He's like, I have to write a lot, and I mean a lot of stuff. Look at that. Even that's colored in. That's so weird.
There it is.
We were flipping through this before we started recording, and we kind of landed on this, and we were just like, holy crap, look at the metal texture. You got the zipatone. And I remember talking about this with my brother in our review of the actual book, but like you have to keep it straight on. So you got to keep it symmetrical. So you have to make sure like, okay, where's the center of the page? Let me center this and then divide it up to keep it balanced with all its proportions. So otherwise you could get it distorted really easy if you're not careful. And
with digital, you can just turn on a mirror.
Yeah.
You draw it and then you turn it off to do the not mirrored stuff.
This is by hand stuff.
That's a skill that's being lost.
Yeah, I agree. I talked about this, how he's got this mask on the helmet. So he did these cross-hatching lines to show like it's creating a shadow of his face underneath it. And all these shadows under his mouth and his chin.
And all those wrinkles are just so cool.
Yep. There's a lot of artists that are extremely competent drawing comics today, but no one is interesting. I look and I'm like, there's no artist capturing anybody's imagination in the big DC or Marvel.
So I went to Free Comic Book Day.
Right.
And that's like the one time a year, 2 times a year that I go into a comic book shop anymore. And I was just looking at what was on the shelf, just to see, because I don't go in there often. And it was information overload.
It is, isn't it?
I was just like, I don't have the patience. I'm just gonna walk away.
I'm just gonna go. So, yeah, I remember I used to walk into comic stores every Wednesdays when they come out, and so you go to the shelves, and here's all the new books, and I want that, I want that, I want that, and now it's just a wall of books. I'm like, I don't even know where to.
And I don't know where anybody's stories are right now.
Yeah.
And I saw this, so I don't know how I got on the list, but I have this thing that comes up on my Facebook feed all the time, and it's called Comic Book Panels Without Context.
Yeah.
And they're always so hilarious.
Okay.
So there's this one where Doomsday just kills a kid.
Jeez.
He just flat out flattens and kills a kid.
Yeah.
I'm like, I need to read the story that's from.
Right.
So I tracked it down. I buy it on Kindle. I read through it. I felt like half the story was missing. Okay. Like it would go from one issue to the next, and I would feel like I was just filling in a lot of information. Like, was there a comic book in between here?
Right.
That I missed? But and I know with Superman, it used to be you had to subscribe to all 4 issues.
Mm-hmm.
And then they had a numbering system so you could keep up with what way the issues went. And these were Superman comics, but I was like, I don't think they're like that anymore. And I couldn't figure out what I was missing. It was like, I was so annoyed that I tried to return all of them.
Right.
After I finished reading it.
Yeah.
And I returned like 4 of them, and then it wouldn't let me return anymore.
That's the thing with comics. It used to be so simple. Now you have to just like find out through online something that you like, and then where can I find it, and then just order it and have it sent to your house. Going into a comic shop sometimes is like, I don't even know where to start.
Yeah, and before I even bought the stuff, I was trying to figure out which issues I needed to read this storyline.
Yeah. And
then the part of the story I wanted to read was so minimal. I'm like, is that really all there is to it?
Yeah.
I felt like I still think I was missing parts of the story that were probably in other titles. That
I love that drawing there. Again, you got more of that. And you've got me totally focused on it now, and I want to know why these big words are colored in like that. That's really interesting. That's a heck of a shot where Cyclops is I like the drawing, and they're blasting Jean Grey, and she's kicking back. Jean Grey's got like the worst costume design ever in these books. It doesn't make any sense. This is fun where Psylocke, she uses her psychic knife on Iceman, and it causes his brain to freak out, so he just fires ice out everyone, just coats everyone in ice, taking her out and making everything difficult for everybody. And then Cyclops blasting, hitting into Rogue there. That shot of like that energy in the shadows, I think that works really well.
And that's cheap ink. That's bullet.
Okay, good point. Good point. Yeah. More colored in, big sound effects. It's just everywhere now.
Yeah, at first it was just like one, and now it's like there's a lot of it.
This is interesting because this is getting into the future issues, because we looked at the issues 1, 2, and 3 on my channel with my brother, and now it's getting into issues like 4, 5, and 6 where the story goes on. So I haven't looked at the actual comics of these yet, but these were still getting into some fun stuff. Like they're playing basketball. So you got Gambit, and I like the shadow, the line work on his face here.
Is he charging up his ball?
He is, because they were supposed to not be using her powers, but Rogue got mad, so she jumped up there and like swatted away the ball. So he's like, okay, whatever. So Wolverine uses his claws to cut the pole to move it so he couldn't make his shot. I was like, you're not supposed to be using your powers. He's like, well, now that we are using our powers, mine will make the game really interesting. And then, so you're like, okay. Well, what's going to happen there? This is interesting, using her screaming no as the panel borders.
Oh, cool.
So that's an interesting thing there. I always like the shot, like it always, even in the original printed comic, these cross-hatching lines on Cyclops looked so precise, and they are. It gives it this like black or like a dark, shiny, leathery reflection kind of look. I don't know. I just thought that always looked really good. I wonder if they're going to have the page in here, because you don't see what happens. You see the reaction of, he basically takes that basketball and throws it at Rogue, and it explodes on her because she's super invulnerable. So she comes blasting through a wall. No, we don't get it. That sucks. But basically she comes crashing through the wall, exploding, and she's really pissed off at him. Like, yo, you son of a bitch. So that was fun. Of course, now this is issue 4. So now we're into issue 5, page 4, where the X-Men have been captured. Man, something horrible happened. Like, were they eating spaghetti and just dribbled all over it? Colored in. Obviously someone's doing that for a very specific reason. I think that these are not inked This is not Scott Williams inks. I'm almost certain of it. It's got a heavier hand. I like it. Doesn't say anywhere that I can see.
Yeah, I don't see it.
This is interesting. He's got John Byrne written on here. I think he had something to do with like scripting or helping write the story. I always like the shot of Cyclops and this up shot of Wolverine's face. This is another that down angle, getting that up shot. That looks really good. Art T-Bear. This is where Jim Lee was not doing as finished a level of work on his pencils, and that it's also not Scott Williams. So the artwork starts getting a little bit more.
It looks like ballpoint.
It almost does, doesn't it? So it's still Jim Lee, but it's not like it's got T-Bear as the finisher. So it's not quite the same thing. It's okay, but not as good. I wonder if Scott Williams needed a break, because again, T-Bear on finishes. It looks like Jim Lee, but it's got a different vibe. It's not the same. I remember thinking that shot was great. Look at more of that Zipatone stuff on these technological things. Just
after looking at all this and all the Zipatone, I like it. I feel like I need to get textures like that for my digital work.
I want to get some of these into my work. Because it has that neat gray tone look. Did you get a chance to see that one I did on the Star Wars manga?
Yes.
That gray tone and all of that. I'm like, I started, after reviewing that book, I started going through my pages that we just scanned, and I got my dirty ink water, and I started adding ink tones on various panels because I'm like, it works. I got to see how this reproduces. So I started just throwing it in places. So it's a little bit of an experiment for me. It's not Zipatone, it's not that, but it's at least adding some other level of work.
I remember I did a pencil drawing years ago, and I had some friends that wanted a copy. And so I took it to a copy shop, and they were like, okay, well, you don't want just a straight photocopy of this. We have a thing that we can throw over it that'll turn those gray tones into patterns.
Really?
And it'll give you a better reproduction of it.
And did it?
It did.
That's interesting.
And it's got a name, I can't remember, but it's an effect that I can do in Photoshop.
Yeah.
I'll have to look it up later.
Look at these big, thick-ass cross-hatchy lines. It's so unnecessary, but I wonder if they're going to have that super hot shot of Psylocke in the swimming. No, she's not. Because she's in a swimsuit that looks like the pattern on it looks like Pikachu from Pokemon. Because it was like blue up top and then yellow, but it was like this rectangular shape with pointy little ears, and somebody pointed out years later, it's Pikachu on her swimsuit. Some weird random thing. I always liked this shot of Gambit. I thought that was a really cool drawing. And then these faces, I always kind of like them. But again, it's Jim Lee's not quite on the. I think he's getting a little bit more. He's getting quicker. He's not doing the same meticulous level of work, and then, or maybe it's the inkers, because again, it's not Scott Williams. Double check and see if any of these are signed, and so it's just wasn't quite as cool. God, I haven't seen this in a long time. Holy crap! Where Ghost Rider was possessed by like a alien brood thing. So, God, I haven't seen that in forever. I totally forgot about this page. Not bad. Sharpie. It looks like straight Sharpie there. He's like, oh, I forgot to blacken. Then, oh, whatever. I got a Sharpie. No one will produce artist editions of these things years later. I always like this shot of the
cool.
skull. Because this is so Psylocke, she uses her psychic knife, the focused totality of her telepathic powers. I say that because she would say it every time. But she zaps him and it gets her into his brain. And so I like this visual representation of Ghost Rider possessed. Here he is, and he's being bit. Like this brood is just like biting into him. And he's like reeling in pain. And that's his like in his mind. And it manifests physically as him turned into like a flaming brood demon of hell. I thought that was a really interesting way of portraying that. And that skull, I think, looks really good. Up angled, but it's a freaking skull.
Yeah.
Big cool shot of the Xmen.
Ghost Rider is such a fun character visually.
If you know what you're doing, you could really, really make it work.
Like, I picked up a few Ghost Rider comics years ago just because it looked so cool. I knew nothing about the character. Yeah.
What in the hell is going on here? Is this like something that bled? Like they colored over it and it bled, or like that you're talking about that ink that bleeds. Like, and again, they're using that color very specifically.
I'm wondering if he was using like I don't know, because that does not look, well, maybe it's hand lettering. I don't know.
That's really weird. A lot of weird things going on. Again, it looks like, is this Sharpie stuff that's bleeding on the borders?
Yeah, that looks like some of my old stuff. Again, when I was using cheap stuff that I could get out of the art room at school.
This is just a dumb little thing, because they're in this place where Longshot shows up in Mojo World, and the X-Men are there, and they're all taken over, and their minds are taken. They're not acting like themselves at all, and so he's just freaking out. Mojo, I swear that when I get my hands around that massive neck of yours, he's so pissed off. And Wolverine, of all people, temper tantrums like that, fella, you're liable to give yourself ulcers. It's so funny to have Wolverine saying that stuff. Oh my gosh, it was one of the greatest things. And Beast is talking like Scooby-Doo.
I rush row.
Yeah, I rush row. This is really rush rating. That's funny. I remember reading this. I'm like, what is going on? So now we're going to get into some covers. I was saying, like, this is. I could make an argument for this being my favorite Jim Lee cover ever. The action and movement and the energy and the anatomy. I just love that so much. Classic, obviously, the cover to this book. All of these are great. I did have you seen, you've maybe seen if you follow me on Instagram or whatever, I did a pinup and I had it colored of the gargoyles, yes. Goliath and Demona.
Yeah. Okay.
Do you see it?
I see it.
I took that pose. I went flipping looking for something. I needed to steal some dynamic pose from somebody. And I saw that and I'm like, oh, and I did like this light kind of texture coming down the sides, and I just kind of added the background on, or the bottom of it on my own. But that's where I took it from. I'm like, if you're gonna steal from the best, right? Great freaking! I love a lot of these covers have a lot of background textures and energies going on, but sometimes just go stark blank image.
Yep.
And you're like, oh, what's going on there?
Which we learned from the Beatles.
Yes. Yeah. Another great. Omega Red at the time when he came out, we all thought he was going to be the coolest thing in the history of the planet ever in the X-Men. And he was super not ever. But Jim Lee drawing him at the time, this was the coolest thing. He's like, oh my gosh, everything has been so amazing. Here's this new thing. And he was kind of like imposing and tough to start, but just kind of felt like a Russian Sabretooth, a big blonde guy that fights Wolverine, that knows him from his past, and he shoots little like tendrils out of his hands. So he was not ever anything. I always kind of dug this redesigned costume of Sabretooth, because his other one had like furry things around his wrists and his ankles and around his neck. This one Jim Lee kind of redesigned. I always kind of thought that was a good redesign of his costume. Bishop. Yeah, and Jim Lee this is like, I think his last issue, the last cover of his last issue, before going off to become more boring in Image Comics. And then back in here we got cards. Or is that, I guess that's an X-Men. It's upside down. That's funny. But you had to put it this way to put the image up right. That's interesting. That so he must have got the paper out and drew it, and then went like, oh shit, it's upside down. Oh well. Of all the characters they have in here, maybe it's all they could get. Freaking the dragon, Lockheed. Like, okay. Always like the team shot. Storm looks great. I was telling you how this drawing of Rogue is one of my favorite drawings of her ever. Maybe my favorite drawing. She looks so playful and powerful. It's just all there. I love that shot of her. Sabretooth, Sunspot, Strife, and the Brotherhood of Evil Mutants. And then just a biography of him. And you saw the thing, I assume, where I talked how I met him that one time?
Yeah.
That was...
yeah,
freaking magical. And then another great end shot on the inside of the cover. Great close-up of the artwork.
I thought about going up that day, but I just couldn't make it work.
Yeah.
And honestly, I like Jim Lee, but he's not my
I had to go
favorite.
and cutting out from work, not going to work that day. That was one of the best days I've ever had.
If it had been Frank Cho, I would have been there.
Dropping everything.
I would have dropped everything to
what
be
if
there.
it was your wife's anniversary or her birthday and he's come on that day?
She would have come with me.
Perfect. Good save. Okay, so all right. This was fantastic to look at. I'm absolutely going to have to pick this up. I'm going to have to go spend some money. So thank you, Richard, for bringing these along. This has just been fantastic. Get a chance to look at these up close. So I appreciate it very much. Anything else? Nothing?
I don't have anything.
We're done. We're an hour into this. That's okay. Anyway, thanks for joining us as always, and see you next time.